Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Frogs of War podcast. I'm Anthony North. That's Russ Hodges. We're here to talk all things TCU sports and another jam-packed week for TCU. TCU football gets the victory, sends the Cactus people back to the desert with a 34-24 win at home with Fox's Big Noon Saturday in town, ahead of going to Austin for number 18 Texas and another College GameDay game. We also had some basketball started in not so great fashion. We'll get into that, talk some recruiting stuff and all of that as well, along with the college football playoff ranking that put TCU at number 4 in one of those precious playoff spots, if only for this week. So, Russ, how are we doing today?
You know, in the spirit of Election Day, I think it's only fair to point out that, not only was there not a red wave in the midterms, there was also not a red wave in Fort Worth. Not too many Tech fans. I was sitting in the 100th section, South End Zone with my dad. Was down for the long weekend, had a great tailgate in the morning with some good buddies of mine from college. And great game, obviously a grinder of a game, but felt good to be back in the Carter. Felt good to see another win. Ready to talk about it, and let's go ahead and just jump right into it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you mentioned you were there in person amongst the crowd at the Carter. There was obviously a lot of talk all off season about the takeover and that Texas Tech was going to come fill the stadium. Certainly, walking around didn't seem that way. Did it feel that way in the stadium? What was the percentage? Was it any more than like a normal away crowd, or
it didn't really jump out to me, to be quite honest. I mean, we had some Tech fans in our part of the section. Thankfully, didn't get hit by any tortillas when the game started. But to be honest, I was looking up at the 200s on the east side, the 400s on the west side, and other than filling out the nosebleeds a little bit, it didn't look very red to me. It looked like probably 75, 25, 80, 20 mix. And as far as the noise was concerned, other than that touchdown when Tech went up 17-13, that was probably about the loudest they got all game. But it definitely did not resemble a takeover whatsoever. So a quick shout out to TCU Athletics and AD/JD again for getting the home fans and getting the purple in the stands, and JD also taking a not so subtle shot at the Red Raider fandom. Viva La Matadors, not too pleased with that, but we move on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we could talk about the actual football on the field a little bit. So it was definitely a defensive struggle, like much more than anyone would have expected. I think both of these explosive offenses kind of would have projected towards a high-scoring affair, but certainly a really tough defensive battle. And really, I don't think it was necessarily poor offensive play across the board. I think really the Texas Tech defense very much came to play. A lot of strong guys there, forcing turnovers on downs and forcing TCU to not be able to score in the red zone. So I guess offensively for TCU, what happened here? Why was it that TCU was unable to score? Because it felt like TCU was pretty well handling this game, long sustained drives, but every time getting down into the scoring zone, something would happen that would prevent the touchdown or ends up pushing out a field goal range or a turnover on downs.
Yeah, I think one thing that stood out was the absence of Quentin Johnston. And going into the game, I honestly wasn't sure that was going to be a big deal or not. He was productive in the West Virginia game. He obviously injured the ankle, and from what I had read, from what I had seen, there was nothing going into the game where you felt like, okay, maybe he's not going to play. Obviously, he dressed and Went through warm-ups, and I had seen him on a couple timeouts trying to warm up, trying to go, but I believe Sonny Dykes talked after the game about how he just didn't quite feel 100%, and the coaches, I'm sure, with Texas coming up, and then Baylor, and then Iowa State, a real physical team, not wanting to risk re-injury of that ankle and missing him for even more time. So I felt coming out right away, TCU played a fairly conservative game plan offensively. I felt like they ran the ball a lot on early downs. You saw a lot more quarterback draws with Max Duggan. And Texas Tech, I think, honestly deserves some credit for the way they came out up front defensively and forced TCU, who, Kendra Miller, again, is averaging over 6 yards a carry this season. Frogs have had a lot of 2nd and 3, 3rd and 2 situations where the playbook is kind of wide open. You can hit Quentin Johnston for a quick slant route, or you can run the football or take a deep shot. In this game, though, it was a lot of 2nd and 9, a lot of 3rd and 9, 3rd and 8, where Texas Tech was able to kind of pin their ears back up front and generate some pass rush. Number 19, I can't think of his name right off the top of my head. He had an awesome game for them coming off the edge. And Max,
Tyree Wilson.
Yeah, he had a nice game for them. They were putting quite a bit of pressure on Max. And, I think the combination of wanting to protect the football, try and bleed the clock a little bit, don't make any mistakes. Texas Tech kind of answered the call in the first half and was winning that field position battle where TCU was having to punt and start drives inside their own 20. Texas Tech, meanwhile, was starting a lot of their drives closer to midfield, working with a short field, which obviously that kind of flipped in the second half. But, getting back to your original question, I think the absence of Quentin Johnston, being a little more conservative offensively, and then when they did get into those red zone situations and some of those short yardage, not really going after some of the big body targets they have. Savion Williams had a huge play in the first quarter, that 38-yard leaping catch down the sideline. He wasn't really a factor outside of that in this game. Jared Wiley, for the second week in a row, didn't have a catch. I don't think he had a target in this game. And even with Quentin Johnston out, I know you want to lean on your next best skill player, and that's Kendra Miller. And he got a healthy workload, 21 carries, well over 100 yards. But I really would like to see the Frogs continue to be aggressive with some of these bigger-bodied receivers and tight ends where you can give them opportunities in one-on-one scenarios against smaller defensive backs and linebackers. Run a little play action, run some fake zone reads. Savion Williams had a back corner fade in the second half that drew a PI flag, and we're sitting in the southeast end zone, and I'm seeing Savion Williams line up outside. They have inside slot receivers with him. I'm thinking maybe they'll run one over the middle, give him an opportunity to go up and get one, and we're like, hey, come hang out at the crib with us. Come join us in the end zone. But that was a little discouraging to see. I hope that's something that the Frogs can look at as they go into this game coming up and just try and give some of those guys with that elite size and length some opportunities.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like Savion could have had some mismatches there because he certainly physically was outmatching some of those smaller corners from Texas Tech that you saw it on that pass interference penalty that I think that defensive back was so upset about that call. He couldn't be contained on the sideline. The coaches were having to hold him back. And, I think, Spivey didn't have a catch. Jordan Hudson with one catch. Nothing from the tight ends. Yeah, really kind of tough day across the board in the absence of Quentin Johnston. And it's kind of that trickle-down effect of the better defenders get to guard, the number 2, number 3, and down the line. So definitely hoping that QJ is back for next week in the key matchup. I think you mentioned it about passes to the tall receivers. I think this was the first game where Blair Conright was a more frequent target. I'm not even sure. I think he had one catch going into the game all season. He ended up only with one catch in this game, but he was he was a big part of the routes being run, and there were a few where he was pretty open and Max missed him high, where certainly if that's QJ or even if it's Savion or Spivey or somebody like that, it's probably a catch, and Conroy wasn't able to come down with those. It seemed like Max was maybe a little bit off his rhythm, a little bit off in that way, and maybe that's, again, a result of having superstar talent like Quentin Johnston not on the field. You also mentioned, oh, shoot, now I just lost his name as well, Tyree Wilson. Tyree Wilson. Man, that guy is a legit star on the defensive edge. I think, we had seen some of him through this season, expected him to be a problem in this game, but man, he really ate up the TCU offensive line, ate up a lot of the things that they were trying to do up front from the Frogs. On that 4th and short where Kendre Miller gets stuffed, I think that's kind of a play calling problem there, where they've got two backs in the backfield, and you're basically asking Trent Battle, a converted quarterback, smaller running back, to make a block on this future NFL player. That's the key to picking up that first down on 4th and short, and that's a big ask. I don't know that Battle made a bad play there. I think that's just a really tough ask for a player like that in that situation, and it cost the Frogs points in that occasion. And I think there's been plenty that has been said about the TCU offensive line's improvement, but I think still when there is an elite edge rush talent, that's a struggle for this unit, and it certainly showed itself on Saturday. We saw it a little bit in the Kansas State game earlier, and we'll see how that looks going forward. But it put Max into bad positions where he's throwing on the run, he's throwing with bodies all around him, with hands in his face. Some of those throws that he's been making all season weren't able to come through, and I think that's a lot of credit to Texas Tech for forcing into those situations. Looking into the second half, I think really this was such kind of a slow burn of a game. We really don't get into much too terribly interesting until Texas Tech's go-ahead drive there late in the third quarter. If you have something else, stop me there, or we can go back to it. But I think that's really where this game kind of opened up, and it was a really poor drive from TCU's defense, where had two opportunities to get off the field on 4th down and couldn't. And that's part of this Texas Tech's new coaching staff kind of philosophy of setting up 4th and short and give yourself a chance to go for it. And, I think Coach McGuire got criticized a little bit later in the game as attempting those 4th down conversions, and they weren't coming through. But if that's the way you're going to play, that's the way you play. I mean, if you're a person who hits on 16 in blackjack, don't stop hitting on 16 against that kind of thing. So do what you're going to do, and it was working here on that drive, and things really broke out when D. Winters went out with the targeting penalty, and I think a relatively clear targeting call. No, it's always fair to argue, but I think it's clear targeting. Probably completely unnecessary from Winters there. It's a tough play because the receiver coming across the middle, kind of falling to the ground, but one that you need to avoid. And immediately Texas Tech took advantage of it. Little running backs leaking out of the backfield, picks up the 4th down, and then it leads to the big touchdown pass where Frankly, Mark Perry lined up 1-on-1 on a big wide receiver, and the receiver makes the play. It's probably not a situation that you want to put Perry in. That's not the guy you want taking on a receiver. They kind of had the receivers stacked out there, and might have been a little bit of miscommunication. I'm not sure, but it was definitely a strong play from Texas Tech there, and gave Tech the lead headed into the fourth quarter. And I guess how nervous were you, and what did you see from the TCU defense kind of going into that maybe had us on edge?
I'll be honest, I wasn't nervous at all. At halftime with TCU up 13-10, I wasn't nervous at all because I felt defensively this was, from start to finish, one of TCU's best games this season. And to Tech's credit, a couple things I felt they did well, even though they didn't get too much inside the tackle box. They did run the ball pretty well off tackle. They also got into some tempo, and that's how they scored their first touchdown, when they were able to get those short yardage gains on some quick slants and quick out routes, and a 6-yard gain on the ground on first down or second down, and then they get up to the line quickly. They take a deep shot, and that's how they got their touchdown in the third quarter. Is they just the opportunities where Tech had to get into tempo, they took advantage and were able to execute, and they went after the corners. Given Trey Tomlinson is, I believe, 5'9", I'm not sure how much bigger Josh Newton is. I think Tech maybe felt they could take some shots down the field against some smaller corners for TCU. But third quarter, honestly, even after Tech scored on that drive and D. Winters gets called for targeting, Tech starts out 3 for 3 in the game on fourth down. That was also an area where they obviously did very well with Donovan Smith, some design runs for him to pick up some short yardage. But I wasn't really all that nervous. I felt that if TCU was able to come back and sustain a drive and score going into the fourth quarter, then we would have a ball game. And was pretty excited that they were coming back into the south end zone to score that touchdown to take the lead. But it was really the Kendre Miller long run where he's able to keep his balance. He breaks through the line, keeps his balance, picks up 30-plus yards. And then before that, I believe you had the face mask, no face mask play.
Yeah.
The phantom call that, from my angle in the stands, I thought that was a face mask call. I think we all yelled when that play happened, and then you see it on the replay, and like, oh, shoot, never mind. But,
yeah,
I think the Frogs dominated the fourth quarter of this game, and I think that's what stood out to me when we kind of reflected on the game was, for the first time, TCU was beginning to flip field position. And we talked about how Tech was starting a lot of drives in the first half in favorable field position. TCU being able to score and take a 3-point lead early in the fourth quarter, and to come out and get a stop on fourth down right after that was a huge turning point. And TCU beginning to play with some confidence. They start pushing the ball down the field a little bit. Kendre Miller's finding some holes. Darius Davis runs a route over the middle to score a touchdown. Now you're up 27-17, and it really kind of it snowballed pretty quickly. The Tech fans in our
it went from a little bit on edge, a little bit like oh no, to over. Like it went from a little bit nervous to just okay, well let's just get out of here. Let's run this clock out and be done here.
Yeah.
Really fast in the fourth quarter. I mean, yeah, you go touchdown, turnover on downs, touchdown, turnover on downs, touchdown, interception. That'll flip the game really fast to take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, TCU, and again, it was the defense was able to cover well down the field. They didn't get too much pressure, to be quite honest, until very late in the game. I think Shad Banks had a sack filling in for D. Winters, and he's going to play a huge role coming up against Texas. He's going to start that game because D. Winters will have to miss the first half. But, yeah, Tech was starting in the same kind of field position that TCU had earlier in the game. And, The first time Tech went for it on fourth down and failed to convert, I didn't mind that they went for it there. I know you brought it up. It's kind of their identity. They'll go for it in those situations. But the second time, I didn't like it so much because I look at it from their standpoint. Your defense has just given up consecutive touchdowns. You've gone from being up 3 to down 10. You're playing on the road. You're risking giving TCU the ball in your own territory if you don't get it here. And maybe it's a situation where you feel like the game is on the line. If we don't get it here, we lose anyway. But I felt like if Tech would have punted there and forced TCU to try and go down the field one last time to sustain a long drive, maybe things would have been a little different. But they finished the game 3 for 6, which means they failed to convert on their last 3 4th downs. And it was just touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. Amari DiMercato runs a real nice wheel route out of the backfield, 16-yard touchdown, I believe, and it's 34-17. Defense just starts coming after Tyler Shaw at the very end of the game. It was almost reminiscent of Bo Wallace in the Ole Miss TCU Peach Bowl game, where it's like he's got 1 or 2 defenders running after him on every snap and throws it up for grabs. Trey Tomlinson gets the interception, and then that's basically the game there. A little disappointed with how the game ended. Would have really liked to see the Frogs punch it in one more time. And I brought it up earlier. I'll bring it up again. Amani Bailey comes in, gets, I think, 4 or 5 carries in a row. And then you have the ball inside Tech's 10-yard line. It's 4th down. Probably everybody in the building thinks you're going to run the ball because you're just trying to bleed clock at this point. You have the lead. Let's not do something stupid. Why not draw up some kind of a play action there? Get Jared Wiley faking on a down block and have him roll over the middle for just a short little pass to score a touchdown or keep the chains moving. Just something that I hope TCU offensively evaluates moving forward is just getting a little more aggressive and more creative in some of those, obvious running situations. And then defensively, kind of rolling over and showing their belly at the very end of the 4th quarter was discouraging. But the grand takeaway, I think, is TCU outscored Tech 21-7 in the 4th quarter, and that was really the story of the game. And at this point in the season, 9-0, and with 3 really tough games coming up, and given how things are beginning to play out on the national level with some of these high-ranked teams, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, just win games how you can at this point. Players have talked about it in media availability before, how they want to feel like they play a full 4 quarters. And to this point in the season, they still don't feel like they've played 4 full quarters. And I would agree with that, and I've brought it up before and agreed with it before. But, overall, again, some of the themes I think that have stood out that were relevant in this game were just not making self-inflicted mistakes, not turning the ball over, and leaning on your leading skill players to be able to kind of carry the load, and that's what Kendrick Miller did. Max didn't turn the ball over, and a dominant 4th quarter to close it out.
For sure. And talking about how things are looking nationally and things are looking in the Big 12 race as well, TCU still needs one more win to be able to lock up a spot in the Big 12 championship game. It was in the Big 12, it was a week of all the teams ahead, still yet to play for TCU, got wins. So it's good for the future strength of schedule, but maybe not as good for what's already happened, the wins that TCU had already gotten. So Baylor gets the win over Oklahoma. Texas took down Kansas State, and Iowa State won as well. But Baylor and Texas now, the TCU's next 2 opponents, are both very much still in the race for the conference championship game, each with an opportunity to take down the Frogs and move themselves up in the conference standings as well. And I think it's a tough thing on the national scale there because Oklahoma State's completely fallen off the map, getting blown out by Kansas. Oklahoma losing to Baylor. They kind of have canceled themselves out. Baylor has not yet done enough to get back into the rankings, but I think they're really close, and maybe a win this week does it. Kansas as well has not been able to climb back up into the rankings. So, I think we're approaching a tough spot where, although all of the teams in the Big 12 have performed very strong through the season, we could be getting close to where if TCU takes down Texas, it's possible Texas falls out of, there'll be 4 losses. I mean, it's not the strongest resume there either. I think it'll probably point to TCU just has to keep winning. And that's what's required. And we know this to be the truth, but, I guess just in the Big 12 race, anything stand out to you from this past week or as we go ahead into the stretch run?
Like you said, I think it's pretty much a 4-horse race at this point between TCU, Baylor, Texas, and Kansas State for those 2 spots. And watching the Texas-Kansas State game, and of course we're going to talk about Texas in a little bit, a little surprised that the Wildcats went back to Adrian Martinez in this game. Obviously, it's great that he's back healthy, but just seeing how Will Howard had played, I was a little surprised that they changed quarterbacks there. And falling behind 31-10 in the first half, I feel like was kind of an indictment of that decision. And, Adrian Martinez, to his credit, made some good throws in the second half, helped bring Kansas State back in that game, but burped up the rock at the very end on the final drive, and that was all she wrote for Kansas State. But you talk about 2 games that are going to have huge Big 12 ramifications. I mean, Baylor playing Kansas State and TCU Texas, the 4 teams that are vying for those 2 spots are going to be playing in 2 head-to-head matchups this weekend. And obviously the Frogs being 2 games ahead, I believe they clinch a spot with a win over Texas. So
just one win. Any one win and the Frogs are in.
Correct. So I think the Frogs obviously have the most margin for error. Not that that's something to be complacent about or something to fall back on, but it's going to be a mad scramble down the stretch here. Baylor, it seems like, regardless of who they plug in at running back, they get a huge level of production. Kansas State, I feel like you can't count them out just because they've played a lot of good football this year. And then Texas, who we're about to talk about, with Bijan Robinson carrying a huge load and getting Quinn Ewers back healthy, it's going to be a dogfight for those 2 spots. And at this point, of course, I'm going to say TCU, I think, is going to wind up in one of those 2 spots. But who that other team is, I don't know at this point. We might need a week or 2 for me to really have a favorite there.
Yeah, Baylor's playing excellent football right now. Texas is obviously very strong as well, and Kansas State is reeling a little bit, but certainly could bounce right back and be just as much in the thick of it headed into the final couple weeks. So college football playoff second week was announced on Tuesday night, and the TCU Horned Frogs made it to number 4. One of the big graphics on the show where TCU's in a playoff spot right now. And, just as much as last week was meaningless and has no merit to anything, how things are going to shake out for the future, and we all felt a little bit slighted with where TCU was. Now TCU getting respect equally as meaningless. I think it's the one thing that is interesting to see in my mind is that Tennessee was moved below TCU with its loss to Georgia, and I think maybe it's a little bit of a testament that the committee actually watched that game because the score wasn't too terribly bad, but Tennessee was quite clearly not as good as Georgia, which nobody's as good as Georgia. Yeah. But the Vols got that opportunity and couldn't capitalize in the way that they were able to at LSU and against Alabama. So to me, that was the most interesting thing that I really, all of our history with this committee, with committees ever for TCU, would have said that TCU would have been behind Tennessee despite the loss there. So, I think in my mind, that's a little bit of a sign of respect. It's a little bit of a, recognition of the resume that TCU has played thus far. But it may just be, hey, let's just put them here. We think they're going to lose eventually. It doesn't matter. Just put them here. Let them shut up for a couple weeks, and then we can move on. I don't know. How'd you feel seeing TCU in one of those playoff slots?
Yeah, I think I had sarcastically said on the podcast last week that whoever loses Georgia, Tennessee is going to be ranked ahead of TCU next week. So let's not worry about it. But
yeah, I believed it. I didn't think that was sarcastic at all. I think that I'm shocked.
People were asking me, and I'm like, I thought we were going to be number 5. That was my guess going into it, that we were going to be number 5. But it is exciting to see the Frogs get a little bit of respect from the committee. Now, Clemson played a terrible football game against Notre Dame. Like you said, the score in Georgia-Tennessee may not look like a huge blowout, but the Dogs took the Vols to the pound and gave them a beat down in that game. And then for Alabama, I watched the end of that game. Such an exciting finish.
Thriller.
Super happy for LSU in the home stadium to be able to win that game. And the stones on Brian Kelly to go for 2 there to knock off Nick Saban. The Frogs got some help, but I think the Frogs deserve to be in the top 4. I felt they deserved to be in the top 4 last week. And now, again, not trying to get too ahead of myself, and we shouldn't get too ahead of ourselves, but should TCU win against a ranked Texas team that went up 6 spots to number 18 overall, there's an argument to be made that TCU would be the number 2 team in the country. I think TCU already has a better resume than Ohio State and Michigan before this game. And if the Frogs can win this game, I don't think it matters how they win it. If it's by 100 points or 1 point, I would pound the table for TCU to be number 2. But that'll be resolved on Saturday, and I'm looking forward to watching that one.
Yeah, again, another week in the Big Ten where coming up where Michigan and Ohio State both play nobodies. So, yeah, I could definitely see that. Certainly, TCU is going to have to keep winning. The Pac-12 teams behind the Frogs keep creeping up. So, you start to get a little bit nervous about Oregon if their only loss is week 1 to this Georgia team. Maybe that the committee clearly has a lot of respect for that team. USC, UCLA as well. So I think if the Pac-12 ends up with a 1-loss conference champion, that certainly will carry a lot of weight as well. It's hard to take too much from this, so we could probably just move on from it. But it's fun to see the Frogs up there. We'll see how things continue. I think there continues to be a national narrative of eventually TCU will lose and then we'll figure it out from there. So hopefully TCU just makes it so nobody ever has to make a decision there, that they just roll the Frogs right into the playoff. I do want to note, though, one thing that maybe felt a little bit, I don't know, kind of serendipitous about the LSU play. It's basically the exact same play in 2014 that Brian Kelly's Notre Dame used on a 2-point conversion to what would have beat Florida State. They ran the play was complete, caught in the end zone, and they throw a flag on it for like a pick play, an offensive pass interference. And if that play had stood, perhaps TCU was playing in the playoff that year. Florida State obviously ended up going undefeated and making the playoff, losing to Oregon. But, it's the kind of thing of that's, I don't know, otherwise is Alabama going to lose another game? Probably not. Maybe. I mean, they've got a tough one this week, but I think those are the kind of plays that, goes one way or another, and the butterfly effect of how many seasons it impacts. So it's good to see some of these teams already in this week clear a little bit of a path. The path is a little bit cleaner for TCU, at least to say with a little more confidence that if you do win all your games, you get in the playoff, which, yes, that is looking far too far ahead. So let's move on to looking just a few days ahead to the Texas Longhorns in Austin, Texas. College GameDay will be there for the second time this season, and also for the second time at an away Horned Frog game. And it's the ABC primetime game, 6:30 p.m. It's the game of the week. It's a huge matchup. Number 4 versus number 18, and TCU not favored. The higher seed, the better seed, the undefeated team is a touchdown underdog on the road at Texas. I think I can see, I understand the reasoning behind it. There's a lot of opportunity for Texas to take advantage of some things against the Frogs, but I guess, Russ, what is it that you're most looking for, the keys to the game for TCU?
Yeah, I think for Texas, expect a heavy dose of Bijan Robinson with a sprinkle of Roschon Johnson. The run game has been real explosive and very potent for Texas over these last few weeks. Obviously, Quinn Ewers is back healthy. Frankly, didn't play well at all against Oklahoma State. Had a better game last week, but it's kind of clear right now that priority one is establishing the ground game with Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. So for TCU, a team that I feel has defended the run pretty well in between the tackles, but has struggled when they get out to the perimeter. I feel like this will be a test of that interior, especially with D. Winters out in the first half. Can this team, this front six, be strong enough in the trenches to get some early down stops and force Quinn Ewers into some obvious passing situations, similar to how Texas Tech set the Frogs and Max Duggan up for some third and long, second and long type scenarios just this past week. So that's one thing that I'm looking for in this game. And then as far as just narratives go throughout the week and into Saturday, haven't really heard much about Gary Patterson. I'm sure that's going to be something that'll be brought up on Saturday. But interesting to see what the comments are about that and how much of a role Patterson plays in lending a hand to this Texas defense. And for what it's worth, you mentioned that the Frogs are 7-point underdogs. TCU, I believe, is 7-3 in the Big 12 against Texas, and the Frogs, I believe, are also 7-1 on game day events. I could be wrong about that. I believe those numbers are correct.
That's correct.
But, That's it. For what it's worth, I'm sure Vegas doesn't consider those things, but it's going to be a huge game for both teams. Obviously, TCU being on the national stage now, but for Texas, you have recruits flipping from Oklahoma and possibly Texas A&M. You're going to have some big-time prospects on campus for that game. Of course, fighting for a spot in the Big 12 championship with 3 losses, possibly a New Year's Six bowl appearance, depending on if they can continue to string together some wins here. So the Frogs, I feel, in Austin have fared pretty well, and I think the Frogs are going to come in with quite a bit of juice for this game. I really like that the Frogs are underdogs. I even heard some people tell me, "Oh, I wish they weren't ranked number 4 going into the week because now people are going to think of them as a playoff team." But Sonny Dykes, he's been on ESPN multiple times in recent weeks, and he says all the right things. I mean, the players, the team, they don't talk about the playoff rankings. They don't talk about hypotheticals. What happens if we win this game and this team loses that game? They just try to come out on a week-to-week basis and take care of business. So I don't think the Frogs are going to come in with too much on their mind. And, one last thing before I throw it back to you is we've talked about the Frogs having some slow starts and then having to come back and put together some really solid second halves in these last few games. Texas is kind of the opposite. I feel Texas is a team that has started off really strong. You look at Kansas State and a few other games earlier in the season. They start fast and then they kind of flounder down the stretch. So you have a contrast in, I guess, identities and how these teams have started and finished games. So I think ultimately it's going to set up for a last-minute finish, possibly similar to the Kansas game earlier this year. But it's going to be a great game. I'm looking forward to watching it, and a lot at stake for both teams.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, I think for me, the thing it's probably very obvious and easy, but the thing that's scariest about Texas is Bijan Robinson, and the scariest that only gets scarier with D. Winters sidelined for the first half. I think that will give an opportunity for Texas to have that fast start, but maybe have it be give them an opportunity to take such a large lead that TCU can't claw back to it. I think we've certainly seen TCU's linebackers and safety core attempt to guard running backs out of the backfield or running backs and slot receivers across the middle, and it's yielded pretty successful results for opposing offenses. And there's not many better than Bijan Robinson at taking advantage of any sliver of space, any attempted arm tackle, and he'll definitely make you pay for it. So no question that he is a frightening prospect to see on the other side. And Roschon Johnson is no slouch behind him either. He's certainly capable of gaining yards as well. But I think I'm somewhat less concerned as I would have been coming into the season about Quinn Ewers. And maybe this becomes his breakout game where he shows everybody why he's the greatest recruit of all time. But he hasn't shown that yet. So unless you count that first half against Alabama, I suppose that maybe that's where it was, and maybe he brings it back here. But I think that offense will run through Bijan, and if the Frogs are able to bottle him up, at least limit the damage, similar to Deuce Vaughn against TCU is similar in the way that offense does run through him, especially we would have thought with Will Howard coming in. But, Deuce, he got loose for a long touchdown run. He picked up several first downs on pass plays out of the backfield. But ultimately his overall impact was somewhat muted as, I don't know if it was game script or the coaching staff started calling, different kinds of plays, but that's what it's going to have to take is some way to get Bijan to not be such a focus of the offense. And their rest of their skill talent, the pass catchers also very strong. I mean, Xavier Worthy, Sanders, all those guys. Obviously, everyone knows that Texas has the stars. They have the talent. The recruiting rankings will continue to keep them above everyone else, save for three or few other teams nationally. And it's about how they execute on the field and how that coaching staff puts them in the right positions. And we'll see what they're able to do. I think there has been, some made about Gary Patterson's impact on this team in general, which I think is probably fair. But his impact for this game, I'm not totally sure what it'll mean. I think it'll mean some emotions will run high. There'll be some, nice embrace before the game with some of the players maybe. But when it comes to time on the field, I'm not sure that Gary Patterson provides a huge impact to Texas in this game. I'm trying to decide how I feel about it. I mean, we have lots to thank Gary for, and as TCU fans that he did a lot for the program. So, I want him to go and prosper. I wish it wasn't at Texas. That's unfortunate. I don't want him prospering this week. And my little bit of pettiness here is we do know what a Sonny Dykes offense and a Riley offense can do to a Gary Patterson defense. Mm-hmm. And it's not good for the defense. So, I do think that the TCU offense will have plenty to say in this game. And I do think a lot of it comes down to how healthy Quentin Johnston is. We saw it, like we talked about in the Texas Tech game. You can't just take a man of that talent off the field and be able to pick right back up. So hoping that he's at least close to full strength and able to provide a boost to that TCU offense.
Yeah, like Stacey King says, I'm a Bulls fan. I brought it up before. I'll bring it up again. Big-time players make big-time plays. Tay Barber had some nice catches to extend drives in the Tech game. He's done that all season. Darius Davis has stepped up on offense and on special teams. He did it against Texas Tech. He's done it all season. But, again, I feel like this is a game where I personally think Quentin Johnston's going to play. Just based off of what Sonny Dykes has said during media. Even though he did not practice on Tuesday, he did practice today, and they're going to kind of evaluate where he's at health-wise. And then Travis Hodges-Tomlinson said he's looking forward to having him back on the field. So my gut is he's going to play. Is he going to be restricted in what he can do? I don't know. I mean, is he able to cut on that ankle? Is he just going to be a go-route threat in this game? Is he going to be a decoy? There are options on the table, but regardless, one thing Sonny Dykes also said after the Tech game was he wished that they were more aggressive in certain spots. And I think what that goes back to is wanting to minimize risk and avoid turning the ball over is one thing, but you can't get too – in a game like this, I don't feel like you can get too conservative. I think you're going to have to – trust that some of your players like, again, Savion Williams, Jared Wiley, Joquarius Spivey, you're going to have to trust them to make plays in these kinds of games. Savion Williams has caught multiple touchdowns on jump balls. We know Jared Wiley is effective in the red zone. Find ways to manufacture targets for them. Find ways to take advantage of their size, their strength, and their catch radius, so that you're not only putting all your eggs in the baskets of a couple guys. So that's going to be something I want to see in this game is who, other than Quentin Johnston, and even if Quentin Johnston has to go out of the game for some reason, who can step up on the outside and who can step up in the red zone so that the Frogs aren't continuing to settle for field goals. And to Griffin Kell's credit, he's having a great season. Again, had a really solid game against Texas Tech. But in this conference and in this kind of game, you're not trying to settle for 3. You're going for 6. So should be a really exciting game. I'm expecting it to go down to the finish, like I said before, and summoning a prayer circle for Quentin Johnston's ankle as we speak.
Yeah, I think there saw several on Twitter like, please take my ankles. I don't need them. Yeah. Get well soon. Yeah, I think just jumping into the predictions, like we said, 7-point favorite, the Texas Longhorns with a total of 64.5. So a lot of love given to the Longhorns here. My prediction on this, I'm going the other way. I have TCU 42, Texas 30. I'm seeing points here. I'm seeing a close game down towards like the last 5 minutes or so where TCU punches one in and then gets a stop and we see the victory formation and TCU gets a 2-score victory on the road over a ranked opponent that solidifies its status as a deserving, undefeated, staying in position to have everything in front of it for the season. So I'm seeing a big game from the Frogs.
I went a little bold last week. I think I predicted a 20-plus point win against Tech. Didn't shake out that way. I'm going to be a little conservative this week simply because of the status of Quentin Johnston and the struggles that TCU has had in the red zone. However, one thing I will point out is Texas has struggled in terms of its pass defense over the last couple of games, giving up quite a few yards to Adrian Martinez, giving up nearly 400 passing yards in the Oklahoma State game. I think this is a secondary that could be vulnerable. So I'm gonna say that Max Duggan makes some huge throws in this game, and 34-31 TCU is my final score prediction to move to 10-0. And we'll be rambling about the playoff rankings next week when the Frogs are still below Michigan and Ohio State for inexplicable reasons.
I love it. I can't wait. I can't wait to be mad about that. That sounds wonderful. That's the best kind of mad to be. Is undefeated mad. All right. So elsewhere in the Big 12 this coming weekend. We talked about it. There's really only it's down to this game between TCU and Texas, and then the other headliner is Kansas State at Baylor. To continue to keep pace for the Big 12 championship. Baylor is a 2.5-point favorite at home, and I really think both of these are really strong football teams, but I think Baylor's just playing at a very high level right now. They're figuring out ways to get it done. That rushing attack has been superb. I think Baylor wins and covers easily over the 2.5 spread and at home, and sets up just a massive matchup with the Frogs next week in Waco that even if TCU were to drop this week, it's still a huge matchup. That makes it even bigger for the Big 12 race next week. I'm taking the Bears at home.
This is kind of a coin flip for me, honestly, but I'm going to pick Baylor for the sole reason of I want Baylor ranked and playing with a lot of confidence at home next week. So the Frogs come in and ruin their season the way they ruined their season last year. So I'm going to take Baylor to win this game and enter the top 25 going into next week.
All right, so that's really the only big game. Let's see, we've also got Oklahoma at West Virginia. This game, West Virginia has to win out to get bowl eligible. I don't think it happens. I think Oklahoma takes it here pretty handily, even though the game's on the road. And that puts Oklahoma into bowl eligible category. And, we heard the playoff committee chair, Boo Corrigan, mention about, wins over above 500 teams as a feather in the cap for TCU. So, for what it's worth, for what those words from any committee chair are worth at all, you probably do want Oklahoma to win a couple games. You want Oklahoma State to win a couple games. You want Kansas to win a couple games. Maybe if Texas Tech wins too, they can get to bowl eligibility. So, that's really how we're looking at these now, because a lot of these teams outside of those top four are out of the conference race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to take Oklahoma to win this game. I'm expecting a bounce-back performance from Dylan Gabriel. He struggled in that Baylor game, throwing 3 interceptions, and the rails are kind of the wheels are kind of falling off the rail car for West Virginia. JT Daniels against Iowa State had a frankly brutal performance. I think he was 8 for 22, passing for under 100 yards and a pick. So. That team is really struggling right now, probably doomed for worse things as the season continues to kind of unravel here. But I agree with what you said. It would be nice for Oklahoma to continue to stay above 500, as Boo Corrigan did say that they value those wins over teams with records above 500. But this is the same Boo Corrigan that also criticized TCU for having to rally, and then talked about a week later performing well in the second half in the defense. So they're practically saying whatever they feel in that moment. But regardless, I pick Oklahoma. I think the Sooners are going to bounce back.
All right, quick on the other game. So we've got Iowa State is a 1-point favorite at Oklahoma State. I guess this is a projection that Oklahoma State has fully just packed it in, and maybe Spencer Sanders is still out. Maybe all of those injuries on their defense are still ravaging them, and the Cowboys have already made their plans for other things in the offseason. I don't know that that's the case. I kind of think Oklahoma State in front of their home crowd. Maybe there's not everything to play for anymore, but I think that team is still talented and well coached, and will come out and go take a win from the Cyclones there in Stillwater.
Yeah, shout out to Iowa State just for getting on the board, no longer winless in the conference. I'm sure it felt good for Matt Campbell and his staff to get that win. Even if it was against West Virginia, but they've been in so many close games, and just for one reason or the other, like I brought up in the past, they're the Chicago Bears of the Big 12. They invent ways to lose games. But I think for Oklahoma State, this is kind of a test of your character as a football program. I mean, you're kind of in a brief free fall here, and you have all kinds of injuries, but Kansas is a good team. You beat Texas, who's a good team. You got dominated by a really good Kansas State team. You still have quite a bit to play for, like you said. So whoever they have at quarterback, whoever's out there, you're playing at home against the second worst team in the conference. This is literally, we've brought up must-win games before. Like, this is a must-win. This I legitimately think is a must-win for Oklahoma State. If they lose this game to Iowa State, they might as well just pack it in and see what they could get out of some of these younger players. But I don't think that'll happen. I think the Cowboys will bounce back.
And then the evening ESPN Plus game is Kansas in Lubbock against the Red Raiders. Texas Tech, 3.5-point favorites over the Jayhawks. I think this is actually going to be a pretty interesting, fun game. If it weren't going on at the same time as TCU Texas, I think it'd be a fun one to kind of just sit back and enjoy. I think there's a lot of interesting things that could happen in that game. And seeing what I think perhaps Texas Tech expended its season's worth of energy in this past weekend attempting to take down the Frogs. I think it's possible Kansas can come in and take advantage of that. That said, I do think Texas Tech is a better team than Kansas, whomever is playing at quarterback for either team. So I'll take the Red Raiders here.
I'm going to take Kansas in this game, and part of me wants to just pick Kansas for every game down the stretch just because I like Kansas's energy. They have good energy. I could see this being a shootout for sure, almost reminiscent of Kansas-West Virginia earlier in the season, because I don't think either of these teams can really play a whole lot of defense. But I like Kansas, and I've brought it up before. I'll bring it up again. I enjoy seeing Kansas play good football and have success, and I hope they continue that with another win over the Red Raiders this weekend.
For sure. So on the national scene, as it might impact the Frogs this coming weekend, not a whole lot of major intrigue. 6 of the top 12 teams are at least 16-point favorites. So really, if there's some major shakeup at the top of the rankings, it's going to take something of a real shock, one of the biggest upsets of the season, or of all time. So I don't think we need to talk about any of those. Those are all so Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, Tennessee, UCLA, and USC are all massive favorites. All of those are at home except for Georgia on the road at Mississippi State. So maybe Mike Leach has something tricky up his sleeve, but I doubt it after his kind of performance of late. So the rest of the interesting games from that could prove important nationally. So Washington, number 25 now, jumped up into the rankings. Washington at Oregon. Ducks are 13.5-point favorite. I think that's too many points. I think probably Oregon can win this game, but Washington has really strong offense. Michael Penix and those receivers are really scoring a lot of points. They're one of the top passing offenses in the country. I think they can make this a little trickier than it should be for the Ducks. Maybe they pull off the upset. I wouldn't predict that, but I think it's going to be a close, fun game down to the wire.
Yeah, I'll take Oregon to win this game, but I will say that as a whole, the Pac-12 seems to be playing better football than it has in years past. Typically, you have one or two teams in the top 25, or just one team that's kind of near the top, possibly vying for a spot in the college football playoff, and it's usually been Oregon in the past, but between Oregon and UCLA and USC and Utah, now Washington being in the top 25, Oregon State was recently in the top 25. There's some better football being played in the Pac-12 this season for sure. I think you can argue that the Pac-12 might even be better than the ACC or some of those middle, lower tier Big Ten teams. But I'll take Oregon to win this game. And one funny note I guess I'll mention is now that the rankings have shifted around a little bit toward the top, and TCU does get moved up to number 4, Tennessee's number 5. Now people are realizing that USC is number 8 and UCLA, I believe, is number 12, despite the fact that UCLA beat Utah by about 2 touchdowns and Utah beat USC. How that works out, I don't know. I believe UCLA also beat Washington. USC has played 0. I'm going to show the gif of 0 from Holes. They played 0 relevant opponents this year. Why they're ranked 4 spots ahead of UCLA, I don't know. Maybe it's because UCLA has 2 losses. Is it brand bias? I don't know. I just think I think it's dumb.
Yeah. No, that is just bad ranking. I think that is definitely one of those brand bias situations. And yeah, I mean, USC doesn't have to play Oregon this season, so they get the benefit of the only way they would have to play Oregon would be in the conference championship. So which they may not even ever have to face each other. So yeah, we'll see how that shakes out. I mean, they play each other, I think, next week, USC and UCLA, so they'll be able to settle it on the field. That'll be a huge game. Other big ones this week. So LSU, coming off their big emotional win, are only 3-point favorites at Arkansas, a team that just lost to Liberty. So that's a pretty curious line there. Probably an indication that this one is going to be a lot more difficult than maybe Tiger fans are willing to admit. I'm not going to project a loss for LSU. I think they're obviously playing at a very high level. Arkansas's not. So, give me the Tigers.
Yeah, possible Alabama hangover. Vegas is probably, and it's fitting that Vegas thinks there might be a hangover involved, that Alabama hangover for the Tigers. But Jaden Daniels looked really good in that game and made some huge plays down the stretch, obviously scoring the touchdown in overtime and then making the throw to the tight end, Foster, I believe. His name was Mason Foster. A play reminiscent, you brought up 2014, reminiscent of Deshaun Watson to Hunter Renfrow for the national championship against Alabama. I know Renfrow is obviously a wide receiver, but a similar play, also a la TCU to Josh Boyce against
Josh Boyce.
Yeah, that seems like just a popular.
And Boise State. Yeah.
It seems like a popular 2-point conversion play call. You see it in the NFL. You see it in college. You roll the quarterback out. He's looking for the pylon. I guess the angles and being able to put
it's too tough to stop.
Yeah, you get out quickly. The defense having to cover in a short field man situation, really difficult to get out there. But anyways, I'm taking LSU to win this game, proving that they are not overrated as we may have thought.
All right, and then we've also got Alabama 12-point favorites at Ole Miss. Is the Alabama dynasty dead? Is it all over? We do this every time after Alabama loses, and that Ole Miss team is really strong, but I'm nobody made any money really picking against Alabama. So I'm going to continue to think that the Crimson Tide will bounce back and take a win here in Oxford.
I'm going to go with Ole Miss just because I'm going to be really happy to see Nick Saban off the sidelines after this year. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. Nick Saban is a legend in college football. For everything.
He's too good. Spread the wealth. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like we're still kind of waiting on that huge Zach Evans game for Ole Miss, and maybe it's because they kind of spread the wealth a little bit. They have Judkins, they have Bentley and Evans, but I could see this game being a high-scoring affair. But the Crimson Tide just don't have the kind of talent that they've had in years past. We've talked about it on the podcast before. Of course, you have a couple standouts. Bryce Young, I felt, did everything he could in the LSU game to try and will that team to a win, making some throws and escaping out of the pocket where you feel like there's no way he can get out of there. And he finds a way to get out of there and finds a way to make plays. I think he'll do everything he can again in this game to keep the Tide in it, but I'm running with the Rebels in this one.
Nice. All right, the last one of note nationally is Louisville Cardinals travel to Clemson. Clemson's a 7-point favorite. A lot of people are saying that the Tigers are like fully eliminated with their loss to Notre Dame. I don't know. They can still run the table and be a one-loss ACC champion for whatever that's worth. But I think there's a chance Louisville goes in there and takes this game. Malik Cunningham is a dynamic quarterback. And if Clemson can't figure out their quarterback situation, and if they can't, if those quarterbacks can't get it done against this Louisville defense, they're in big trouble. So, I'm thinking this is the upset spot here. So give me the Cardinals over the Tigers.
I have not watched an ounce of Louisville football this year, but what I will say is just watching the Notre Dame game, I mean, Drew Pine was like a bus driver in that game. He's just driving the bus while all the kids in the back, all the skill players are having all the fun. I mean, I think there was a stretch later in the game where Notre Dame ran the ball probably 9 times in a row with 3 different running backs, and they were just picking up chunks and chunks and chunks of yards, just jamming the football down their throats and burning that clock off. And quarterback has been a problem for Clemson all season. They just haven't gotten consistent high-level play out of DJ Uiagalelei, and then the freshman behind him has made some mistakes as well. So they've put a lot on Will Shipley's shoulders. He's had some good games this year. He's been probably their best player on the offensive end, but Clemson's overrated as heck, man. I mean, I hope they continue to lose just to shame the committee for having them so high to begin with, and to keep them in the top 10, honestly, after the way they got beat down. I mean, Drew Pine, I don't think he had, 80 yards, 90 yards passing in that game, and it just, give me Louisville. Give me Louisville.
Great. All right, so that's all for football this week. We're over an hour, but there's a couple other big things that we just have to speak to this week. So first is TCU women's soccer. Won in the Big 12 semifinals, fell in overtime to West Virginia in the Big 12 finals, so they were unable to get that trophy in back-to-back seasons. Real heartbreaker of a game, in first overtime, just a few minutes in, West Virginia has a free kick from deep in its own defensive zone and just sends the West Virginia defender sends a deep ball. I don't know, 70 yards, just a super long kick. It bounces in front of TCU goalkeeper Lauren Collette and bounces over her into the goal. And TCU is unable to score in the rest of the overtime periods, and West Virginia takes that win. But all is not lost for the Frogs, as they are 5 seed in the 64-team NCAA tournament. So they're in the Notre Dame region, but get a home game this Friday night, 7 p.m. at Garvey Rosenthal's in their opening game of the NCAA tournament against UT San Antonio. So come see the Frogs take on the Roadrunners and continue their pursuit of the College Cup. Go see the game. Tickets are super reasonable. I think it's like $10 for adults. So get yourself out there. Go enjoy an awesome TCU sports atmosphere and cheer on the Frogs in the postseason. The other thing that we have to touch on is the TCU basketball team opened their season at home against Arkansas-Pine Bluff. TCU was 36.5 point favorites, one of the highest favorites in the first few games of the season. Arkansas-Pine Bluff in the Ken Palm rankings, one of the worst teams in the country, bottom 10 out of 360. TCU was down 29-9 in this game, a 20-point deficit in the first half. TCU was playing frankly horrific basketball through much of this game. I was in the building. I don't know, Russ, if you were able to watch much of this. TCU did walk away with a 1-point win at 73-72 at the end, and it was almost a heart stopper because the Golden Lions had a shot at the buzzer that was, from just outside the paint, a very good look at the basket that just wasn't able to fall. So almost a disaster to start this season that, we entered in with a lot of promise.
Yeah, and the first thing that stood out right away was no Damian Baugh. Again, Frogs are kind of at the mercy of the NCAA with the whole appeal of his suspension. But like you said, just frankly trash basketball from TCU in this game. And for a team that is coming in with not a lot of perimeter shooting, and the Frogs didn't really shoot the ball well from the perimeter last season. Shahada Wells started in place of Damian Baugh, and he's going to need to be a key player for TCU, at least over this early part of the season or until they get some kind of clarity with the Damian Baugh suspension. He struggled in this game, didn't do a whole lot. They got essentially no offense from the bench. Jacoby Coles, I want to say he missed every field goal attempt he took. Eddie Lampkin was very quiet in this game, only had 2 points, I believe. They really leaned on Emmanuel Miller and Mike Miles. And to Miller's credit, I think he hit a three-pointer or two, and maybe that's something he's adding to his game because he wasn't much of a three-point shooter last season. But outside of O'Bannon and Miles, they're going to need some guys to knock down shots, whether it's Coles or Wells or Peavy. I know Peavy's not really much of a scorer, but it's going to be a struggle for this team to get into the 60s and 70s consistently if they shoot the ball from range the way they did in this game. And you get a win however you can, I guess, at this point of the season, but God, at least we're not Oklahoma. We could have lost to Sam Houston. At least we avoided that fate.
It could be worse, and yeah, the offensive movement was sluggish. It didn't seem like there was much going on. You mentioned Eddie Lampkin. I think he touched the ball on offensive plays like 4 times all game. All of them turned into great plays. I mean, he had a couple of distributions out of the post that were really nice that led to buckets. He had a really great dunk for an and one down in the post. He missed the free throw, but still, and actually free throw shooting certainly was a struggle for TCU last season. Somewhat better here, shot over 70%, but scored, I think it was 27 of 35, something like that. Got to the line a whole bunch. Really picked up a lot of fouls in that first half that helped bring that 20-point deficit back within range before halftime. And yeah, Iman Miller was really fantastic. Mike Miles was fine, but big time players make big time plays, and he hit that three to give the Frogs their first lead right there. Just under a minute left to play, and it was a massive moment. Schallmeyer went crazy. He was celebrating. It felt like, all right, maybe they're here now. Now the team that we saw at the end of last season has arrived, but still. Chuck O'Bannon missed the front end of a 101, 1-and-1 at the free throws at the end of the game where, TCU's up a point and it could have been up 3 if he hits both free throws. Instead, he misses it. They take it down the length of the court and get a good shot. And just kind of lucky that it missed, to be honest. And so happy with the win. TCU has Lamar on Friday night also, so if you don't find yourself at Garvey Rosenthal, head over to Schallmeyer and watch the basketball team. I don't think you'll be able to catch both. I think they are happening simultaneously, so take your pick there. But hopefully better days ahead for TCU men's basketball. TCU women's basketball defeated Lipscomb, so that's good. We got some official signing news across baseball and basketball. So kind of the big news out of that is that TCU did formally get signed letters of intent from Jace Posey and Isaiah Manning, the big recruits for TCU men's basketball. Posey, a 4-star small forward, top 100 recruit, number 76 overall, and Manning, a 3-star big power forward, 6'7", here from Mansfield. So good news, at least on the recruiting front. And women's basketball, their recruiting class looks maybe the best that TCU women's basketball has ever had. 2 4-star prospects. Victoria Flores is a top 80, top 50 in some places, kind of a superstar point guard at Duncanville. So exciting times for the future of TCU sports there. And I don't know anything else on the basketball stuff. I think it's just we're happy to get a win, and there's a lot of kinks to work out for this squad.
Yeah, and I think the defense at the start of that game against Pine Bluff was real discouraging with how many threes. It was like a three parade.
They could not miss.
They could not miss. And to their credit, they did hit some contested shots, but the defense is going to need to tighten up considerably. And then offensively, my biggest question is who's going to take on that lead guard point role for TCU with Damian Baugh out. To Mike Miles' credit, he's a really good player, preseason Big 12 Player of the Year, but he's more of a two guard. He's more of a scorer. He's not much of a facilitator. And Shahada Wells didn't play last year with an injury, transferred in from UT Arlington. You look at his numbers from UTA, he was more of a scorer there as well and not as much of a distributor. PJ Haggerty, the three-star recruit, the freshman, didn't play in this game. Micah Peavy is more of a combo wing, can defend, cut to the basket a little bit, but that's a question mark for me is who's going to really run the offense and be a primary facilitator. And, that could even be a reason why Eddie Lampkin didn't get a whole lot of touches. And in college basketball, you got to manufacture ways to get the big guys involved, and you got to get them the ball. It's not just about sitting down on the block. You got to have a guard who can get them the ball in different spots. And that's what Damian Baugh can do, and they don't have him right now. So that'll be interesting to see. Maybe Mike Miles takes kind of a backseat scoring-wise, and they ask him to be more of a distributor. Maybe they get some other guys involved, but something to definitely keep an eye on, see how the Frogs adjust as they go into the next game.
Yeah, Ball has elite court vision, and his distribution is sorely missed. And I think we harped on how good he is at that, but you really don't even understand how good he is until he's not there. And you see how that offense works when he's not around. And we really don't know anything about this suspension, when it's going to end, if it's going to end, what's going to happen next. I hope it gets settled in expeditious fashion so that Ball can get back on the court for the Frogs. And, we'll just have to see how it plays out. We know that things with the NCAA never seem fair or make any sense whatsoever. So who knows how that'll work. All right. I think that we've gone long. We appreciate everybody sticking with us. Hope you've enjoyed this show. Lots to talk about. Maybe in the future we split things up across maybe some different shows. We'll see it. We'll see how this works going forward with the big football and basketball seasons going simultaneous here for a little while. But of course, thank you guys all for listening. Thank you for following us on frogsofwar.com, on Twitter at frogsofwar. Catch us on YouTube, Facebook, everywhere you get podcasts and content about TCU sports. Let us know what you think, what you want to hear. We love hearing from you all. And that's all I got. I've got to go Frogs.
Yep. Horn Frog Nation. Let's ride.
Let's ride. Go Frogs.